Today is Wednesday, June 13th, 2018. My name is Ann Peskin, and it is my honor and privilege to interview Martin Levine for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, Ann.
Please tell me your name.
Martin Levine, or some people call me Marty.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in New York in 1939.
So how old are you?
78 and a bit.
Who were your grandparents?
My grandparents were in Stamford, Barnett and Bertha Levine. Bertha was born a Schlafer.
And they lived in Stamford?
And they lived in Stamford mostly. They also lived in Mount Vernon. I also had other grandparents who lived all over the country at different times on my mother's side.
How did your grandparents in Stamford earn a living?
My grandfather was a news dealer. He had a small store, an old-fashioned newsstand, variety store, and he also delivered newspapers.
Your mother stayed at home?
My mother stayed at home, yes.
Now, about grandmother, I mean, who are your parents?
My grandmother worked in the store.
Oh, she did?
Yes, she helped out in the store.
And now let's talk about your parents. Where did they live?
They lived mostly in Stamford.
Both were born in Stamford?
My father was born in Stamford. My mother was born in New York.
How
And grew up in San Fernando Valley.
Really?
She was a valley girl.
How did they earn a living?
My father was a public accountant. My mother mostly was a homemaker. And when the kids left home, she became a manager of a bookstore on Bedford Street.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your family. How were they involved in politics or community service?
Okay, my parents were very involved in the Jewish community, not in politics in general. My father was president of B'nai B'rith Men, and also was the first president of the Agudath Shalom Men's Club. My mother was president of B'nai B'rith Women, and was also on the board of the JCC for many, many years.
What kind of conversation did you have at dinner?
There were 3 boys. The conversations were very varied. They weren't about politics generally, they were mostly about us.
Now, where did you go to college?
I started at UConn and then transferred to NYU.
And when was that?
That was 59, I transferred to NYU. So I started in 57.
So you went back to New York City.
I went back to New York City, well, not exactly, but the same. I went to Greenwich Village.
Where did, now, who were your political heroes when you were growing up?
Well, growing up, it covers a long period. So Adlai Stevenson, certainly when I first became involved in politics in high school, Adlai Stevenson was a hero. And then got into college, and it was Julian Bond and John Lewis.
Interesting. Now, what defines politics to you?
Politics is a process by which we govern local communities, states, and nations, hopefully for the best.
When and why did you decide to get into politics?
I got into politics because I was involved in the civil rights movement in the early 60s. I did freedom rides and sit-ins and things like that. I was very much involved in that. And when I came back to Stamford, looking to live real life, I wanted to get involved in some way to further the civil rights movement. And I ended up, after bouncing around a little bit in the local NAACP and CORE, I ended up in politics as the best way that I could influence the community.
Which group did you join for the politics?
At the time, Stamford was broken into Democratic clubs.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a West Side Club, an East Side Club, a Pulaski Club, and there was a North Stamford Democratic Club. And I became involved in the North Stamford Democratic Club and rose pretty quickly within the club to become president of the club at a fairly young age.
It was before my time, I think.
Just about.
Well, you decided to go into politics, as you said, because it was important to you. How did you accomplish actually getting into not only the club, but moving on?
So the club process was a good one because it was an opportunity to get to know people, and for people, young people particularly, to get to know other people who were involved in politics. I learned about how the political system works in Stamford. I had some good mentors. Peg Weinberg was one, Bill Linke was another, and they were both very, very learned political people who were progressive but grounded, and I learned from them how the political process works in Stamford through the city committee and through getting involved on boards and commissions.
Which party did you belong to and why?
I'm a Democrat. I've always been a Democrat. And why? Because the Democratic Party, in my view, is a progressive party that was willing to cast aside the traditions that were holding us back, traditions that I felt were counterproductive to the overall quality of life for everybody in the community. And the Democratic Party was able to adopt new ideas, take them on, and move them forward.
Now, you said you rose in the Democrat in North Stamford. What offices did you hold after? There and moving on?
So I was on the city committee at the time for a while, and actually as president of the North Stamford Dems, I organized the city committee members from the North Stamford Dems, which were about 8 of us at the time. And we were a power. We were the biggest single group, and we were able to work with the other groups, partly because I had grown up in Stamford and related to other parts of the city very well. I grew up in Glenbrook, so I got along with people from Glenbrook and other areas.
How long did you serve in that role?
I think I was on the city committee for 4 years, and then I was asked to be on the zoning board. And when I went on the zoning board, I left the city committee because I didn't want there to be any political conflicts, since zoning board is such a sensitive area. And somebody took my position on the city committee, and I then devoted myself to the zoning board for the next 10 years.
So that brings us up to about what time?
That brings us up to 1985.
And then what?
I put a huge amount of effort into the zoning board, and it had had an impact on my career success, and I needed to fix that. So I backed off of politics for a while and focused more on my career, and that made a big difference and helped me in many ways. And then it was another 10 years before I went back into a city board.
And what was that?
That was the tax appeals board. So I got to see how tax appeals work and work with people who came in complaining that their houses weren't properly evaluated and assessed.
That wasn't the assessment.
Now it's called the Board of Assessment
Yeah.
Appeals, but it used to be called the Tax Appeals
Oh,
Board.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because I followed in that one for 10 years too. So then what happened?
And then I retired. I was looking for something to do that I felt would be productive to the community. And a neighbor stopped by the house and said that She was very upset about what was happening with the Board of Education. They were very disorganized, and she felt that I should go down and look and see what was doing there. I went to a meeting and I saw how things were going, and I said, I can do better than this. And so I ran for the Board of Education.
And let's talk a little bit about that. How
Sure.
do you ever get on to run for the Board of Education?
That was interesting. There was some resistance from the then mayor and the head of the Democratic Party. They wanted to only run 2 candidates because the Democrats could only win 2 seats. And I took the position that we should run 3 candidates, and that I wanted to be the 3rd. The accumulated knowledge I had of how the political system works, and the connections I made with other people on the city committee, and the reputation I had, I think, from being on the zoning board, was enough to enable me to get the endorsement with the other 2 candidates, and the 3 of us ran, and I was one of the 2 winners.
And then you were on the board for how long? Just once?
I was on the board for 9 years.
3 times?
3 times, yeah.
Who was that leader at the time that you first started?
Leader of the Board of
Was that Ellen?
Education. Oh, leader of the city committee
Yeah.
was Ellen Canline.
Can you tell us a story of one or more of your mentors, if such is?
On the Board of Education or on the zoning board? On the zoning board, it wasn't a political mentor so much, it was a zoning mentor who was very helpful. Tom Byrne was the executive director of the Connecticut Federation of Planning and Zoning Agencies. And I was looking to make big changes in the zoning board and the way the zoning board functioned. But I was not getting support from the Corporation Council at the time. When I sought advice, what I got was political advice from the mayor's appointee.
Who was the mayor at the time?
Lou Claps. And so I needed advice. I went to Tom Byrne, who had authored the only book on Connecticut zoning, and was a zoning attorney in West Hartford. And he very graciously worked with me to help me shape what needed to be done, and was of tremendous assistance.
Mm. And who were your supporters when you ran?
For the Board of Education, the people who had known me from North Stamford were big supporters. That was very helpful. I think there were progressive, liberal people throughout the city who were supportive because I presented a well thought through agenda, what I wanted to accomplish, and I think people heard that and felt that that was needed.
Did you have any obstacles? Did you face any obstacles?
Oh yeah.
How'd you overcome them? Maybe one at least.
You know, it's sometimes difficult for a newcomer to break in and become distinctive on the board. But when I was elected, I immediately arranged to have breakfast with every member of the board and talk about what their goals were and how they worked with mine and where we could find common ground. So I had a relationship with them, and that was good. That was good because as time went by, I found that I could think back to the conversations I had had and reference, well, if this is what you want, here's how what I want will fit into it, and what can we do to make you get what you want while I'm getting what I want. All positive about educational policy.
Right. Now let's go into before you were elected, you had to campaign. And how did you feel about campaigning?
At first, I was very positive and comfortable with the process because I had campaigned for so many other people over the years by that time that I knew what had to be done. There were some people who got together who insisted I needed a campaign group to help me. And the first thing they told me was I had to raise $25,000. And I said, no, I could do that. I don't think I need it. People know who I am. And then they told me I had to run on trying to keep the budget down. And I said, I could mention that, but that's not what I want to run on. It's not me. So I ended up running on my own and forming my own campaign structure, and fortunately found somebody who worked with me to produce campaign literature, and went from there. In the end, I raised just over $10,000, and it was more than sufficient.
Was it hard to raise that much?
No, everybody, people I knew were very generous. That was 1998. The part that I was concerned about was I was very introverted, and I found it appalling that I would actually have to knock on doors and introduce myself to people, or stand in front of a supermarket and say, hi, I'm Martin Levine, I'm running for Board of Education, but I found as soon as I started doing it, I was very comfortable with it. I was surprised, and I loved it. It was quite enjoyable for the most part.
Did they have small group meetings at people's houses? Or was that
No, not very much at all. I had a couple of them right in the beginning.
Were you involved in the debates? Were there many debates?
Yes, yes. There
what
were
was
debates.
The issue at that time?
The biggest issue, I think, was redistricting was an issue. That's always an issue in Board of Ed, and I was fully familiar with the history of redistricting in Stanford. Because when I started, actually that's how I first got involved in the North Stanford Democratic Club. I had gone to a hearing and spoken at length in favor. I was new to politics in Stanford. Everybody, who's that guy? And so I was asked to join the North Stanford Democrats and went from there. So I was very comfortable with the issue. And other issues, at that time, the achievement gap was first being recognized, being named. It was a problem before then, but it was being named as an issue. And I was very strongly in favor of doing what had to be done to fix that. And I ran on that.
How'd you like doing the debates?
I enjoyed the debates. One of the things that, so you put a lot into politics, you get some things back. One of the things I got back was comfort with public speaking, because I was chairman of the zoning board for 8.5 of the 10 years I was on it, and I got accustomed to speaking before groups. So that part didn't faze me at all. And because I'm something of a policy wonk, I got into a lot of depth on Board of Education issues. I was very comfortable presenting that depth.
What were the main issues during your 9 years?
The main issues haven't changed over the years. Redistricting was an issue. The achievement gap was an issue. Hiring a superintendent and paying a superintendent was an issue. Those were the biggest things. So on the achievement gap, for instance, one of the things I accomplished is when I was campaigning for the Board of Education the first time, I took the time to study the summer school process. And the summer school at that time was mostly an elective enrichment type of course. So my children, for instance, went to summer school and they took baking classes and things like that, art classes. I proposed changing that, and I spoke before the board as a citizen while I was campaigning, and I made a presentation of 10 points that we need to adopt in our summer school program. And the most important was that summer school should not be elective and it should not be enrichment. It should be remedial and it should be required for all children who were not meeting state standards, who were doing poorly on the testing. And we did that. As soon as I went on the board, we accomplished that. And ever since then, summer school is remedial and it is targeted to students who are doing poorly.
Were you involved with the unions at all when you were on the board?
My wife was a teacher, so I couldn't get involved in anything to do with the teachers' union. I was involved with the administrators' union and with the paras and the custodians, the various unions, but I stayed away from anything regarding the teachers.
What would you say was your proudest moment in your political career?
I would say that the near completion of a comprehensive rezoning of the city of Stamford was the biggest thing. That was a huge undertaking. The city had never been properly zoned. After the city and town were joined together in 1949, the city had zoning and the town had zoning, and they were two separate sets of laws. When they were put together, it was done last minute with crayon, and it was really sloppy. And it was done before the master plan was approved. So zoning had never conformed to the master plan, which was wrong. It was supposed to follow the master plan, but there was no requirement legally that it follow it. The comprehensive rezoning addressed some of those issues, brought the zoning almost entirely into conformity with the master plan, and corrected some of the concerns people had about an extensive spread of commercial development into residential neighborhoods.
Anything special that you remember or you would like to remember about your career at the board? One, you mentioned the summer session, which makes sense. Anything else you influenced strongly?
For a brief period of time, Stanford had in 2 schools a Spanish language program starting from kindergarten. I felt that that was a critical program for several reasons. One was that it was an enrichment program for all students. Another was it was a way to provide children with an understanding of there are other languages, there are other cultures throughout the world, and it's a great adult skill to be able to speak another language fluently. And this was a good start instead of starting in high school. I also pushed for encouraging Spanish over French. Over the years, I've met many people who said, oh, when I was in high school, I studied French. I wish I had studied Spanish. I never met anybody who said, I studied Spanish, I wish I had studied French. There are so many more countries, so many more people who speak Spanish than French. French had a leftover artistic flair to it. It was a very continental language, very sophisticated, but for the most part, it's useless compared to Spanish.
Was there any time that you had
Oh, by the way, that program unfortunately was canceled because of lack of money by a short-sighted superintendent.
Any regrettable moment in all your political career?
The only thing I regret, at the end of my time on the zoning board, we had almost completed the comprehensive rezoning. We had left the downtown for last. And the mayor at the time decided to replace me. And so the downtown was never done. It still has not been done, which is foolish because downtown is arguably the most important part of the city today. So in bits and pieces, there have been changes made. but it would have been better if it had been done comprehensively at the time or any time since.
Who was the mayor then?
That was Tom Serrani.
Was being Jewish a help or a hindrance in your political career?
I can't think of an instance where it made a difference at all.
Well,
I think being Jewish and growing up with a Jewish perspective on life provided some of the motivation for me to identify with the underdog, and so that was a factor. But in terms of interacting with other people, never really an issue.
You were two children?
Two children.
Two children, two boys, was it?
Boy and a girl.
Are they involved in politics?
Not at all.
Would you want them to be?
I would want them to do something productive that helps other people. I think that's important. They both have a fine sense of ethics, and that's good. Whether they want to be involved in politics is up to them. So far, they're not.
What legacy would you say you are leaving behind? Right now, we want to stop a second because you're working with the mayor in some form.
Right now, yes, I'm volunteering.
This is again, another area. Tell us a little bit about that.
I helped elect the mayor, David Martin, and when the election was over, he asked me to head up a transition team, which I did. It was unexpected. And then when I helped move him into his office, he grabbed me and said, of course, you know, you can pick out an office for yourself. I hope you're going to stay. So that was a surprise too. And I did. And I thought I would stay for a couple of months, but so far it's been almost 4.5 years. And I have made a small contribution there, and I've enjoyed that.
Oh, right. Now let's, really the important question is, what do you feel your legacy is? It's been a long political career.
Okay, 2 legacies.
Okay.
I think when I went onto the zoning board had a bylaw that the professional staff, the director of planning and zoning, could not attend the zoning board meetings unless he was specifically asked. When I found out about that, I worked to change it right away. We changed that, but the zoning board still didn't have professional staff to rely on. One of the things I changed was to hire a zoning analyst that would analyze each application and present to the board from a professional perspective what the issues were for each application. That stayed long after I left, and today there's a much more professional process on the zoning board, which relies on people who have greater knowledge than individual zoning board members do, and can express the zoning issues in a way that limits the opportunities for people to make decisions based on personalities and things like that, political connections. So that was the biggest contribution there. And on the Board of Education, I think the summer school and the overall emphasis on making sure that the weakest students are given more attention. I remember having a conversation with the superintendent of schools long before I was on the Board of Education. And I said, I have heard that there are people graduating from our high schools who can't read. And his response was, that's a terrible thing to say. We had some of our students going to Yale and Harvard. That misses the point, doesn't it? It's one of the reasons I was motivated to run for the Board of Education was that was not a satisfactory answer for me.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to add that I haven't had a chance to ask?
No, I think you've asked good questions and given me an opportunity to review some of my political past. And I think I just want to say that it's important for good people, well-meaning people, and capable people to be involved in politics. Too many, by far, dismiss politics as being grubby business they don't want to get involved in. But that's not good politics, and it's only grubby if the good people don't participate. That's what you have to do to make the world work well, to make our community work well, is make that contribution to do it for the best of reasons, and not let the people who do it for the least of reasons, the worst of reasons, have control.
Thank you so much.
Okay, a pleasure.